And then one of the most important aspects of layer production or egg production is feeding and drinking, right? And let me just take you back to our feeding regime at Profeeds for layers. So we've got a 5-phase feeding, right? And we start with the chick starter, which is fed from day old to 8 weeks. And then we go to the layer developer, which is like a grower. And this is also important because it develops the birds, it develops the organs as they prepare for egg production. And we feed the layer developer from 8 weeks to 16 weeks. And then we've got another feed as before we step into the production feeds. We've got a pre-lay. And a pre-lay is a feed that is also given to the layers from 16 weeks until you get to 5% production. So by 5% production, I mean when you've got 100 beds, when you start to pick 5 eggs a day for about 3 consecutive days, then you know you have reached your 5% production. And when this happens, now you move on to layer phase 1, which is a production feed. We feed layer phase 1 from 5% production up until 45 weeks. And then from 45 weeks all the way until you cull your birds or you get rid of them, you move on to layer phase 2. So layer phase 1 and layer phase 2 both are production feeds, but layer phase 2 has got a higher calcium because you will see that as the birds get older, the shells of the eggs, they start to soften, and the phase 2 will correct that softness and breaking of shells. So it will be low spec as far as protein is concerned, but as far as the calcium is concerned, it's got higher. So if you've got birds that are 72 weeks old and you continue to feed them phase 1, you may get the eggs, but the shells will not be as strong. So we actually recommend you to move with the phases as we recommend. So like today in this farm, they've got these birds at 34 weeks and they are still feeding layer phase 1, right? And the most important thing to note is that we are not feeding a pellet. This is a mesh or in the form of a meal. And as you will see, it's got like grains, crushed maize, which is very important for the gizzards of these birds. And when it comes to feeding with layers, we do not, especially at production, we do not recommend ad-lib feeding. Ad-lib feeding is whereby you come in the morning and you fill your feeders and you don't allow the feed to run out. You keep on topping and they keep on eating. Now, when we are talking about these layers, 1, we don't want to underfeed them. And number 2, we don't want to overfeed them. We just want to give them just the correct amount of feed. And with our Profeeds layer feed, we recommend that each bird gets 110 grams per day of feed. So you just calculate, like here, they've got about 470 birds. So that's 470 times 110 grams, and it's about 51.7 kgs per day, right? So this is what they're supposed to give per day. If you give less, you might only maintain the birds, but you will not get the egg. If you feed more, you will overfeed. The birds will start to have fat around the oviducts, and you start to get eggs breaking inside, and sometimes they actually stop laying when they are overweight. So you need to take into consideration that with layers, it's always the recommended feed per day. And now you'll find that with these birds, they can get bored. If you feed them in the morning and they finish their feed, and then they've got nothing to do, they start to peck each other, they start to run around, they start to do all sorts of things. So we normally recommend that you do what we call split feeding, whereby you feed half. Remember, for these birds, I said 51.7, so let's call it 52. 52 kgs per day. So you are doing half the feed in the morning. So let's say around 7, you come and you feed 26 kgs. And you just divide the feed depending on the number of feeders that you have. We recommend that you have more feeding space so that there is no pressure when it comes to eating, there is no bullying, so your feeding space must be adequate, right? And then you feed the other half, let's say at 3 p.m. This will allow them to have feed all the time, but on our side, we are not overfeeding. So please make sure that you can, we really recommend split feeding. And there are some people who do it 3 times a day, so whatever suits you, but just make sure that you are not exceeding the recommended feeding quantities, right? And then when it comes to drinking, right, remember water is also as important as the feed. And we always tell you and teach you that when you give 10 grams of feed, give the 2 times the amount of water. So 10 grams of feed, at least your chicken must be consuming about 20 mils of water. So water is very important. And again, I will repeat that water availability is one thing and water quality is also another thing. It depends where you're getting your water from. If you don't trust your source, we recommend that you actually put chemicals in the water. You can put chlorine tablets so that you kill all pathogens, because water, dirty water, is a big risk to your flock, and you end up treating diseases just because the water was not clean. So we recommend that you clean. If you've got nipple drinkers, clean them. If you've got this type of bell drinkers, clean them every morning before you refill with water so that there are no pathogens. But like in this season, it's very hot and we want to avoid heat stress. So your birds need to be drinking as much water as they can so that they don't get dehydrated and they are not heat stressed. So many people who normally call us complaining that they've got birds at 30 weeks but they are still not laying eggs. What is the problem? Is it your feed? Is it, are they sick or what? So there are so many factors that can cause your birds not to lay eggs, right? And the first thing that I want to show you here, as you're looking at this beautiful girl that I'm holding, the first thing that we need to look at is the comb, right? This thing. And with the comb, to show that the hen is mature and is ready to lay an egg, it must be big and bright red. As you can see this, and even as you can look around here, you see that almost all the combs are mature, they are bright red and they are nice, right? And so this is a sign that this chicken is actually mature and it can lay an egg, right? The second thing that I will want to show you, but I don't know if you can see, is there's what we call a pubic bone. And these are 2 bones in between the legs. And you will notice that when the birds are still smaller, it's still a bit closed and it opens with age. So you must be able to put at least 3 or 4 fingers in between the pubic bones. And this is where the egg comes out. And if it's not wide enough, it means that hen is not ready to lay eggs. And then when you get your point of lay at 18 weeks, another important thing that you also need to look at is the weight of the birds. So we expect that for a bird to start laying, it should be with an average weight of 1.4 kgs. So if you've got a 1 kg bird, it's surely not going to lay. And we also don't want to have these girls above 2 kgs because now they are on the other side of the scale. They are now too heavy and they will not be as productive, right? And another thing that might also hinder your layers from laying eggs is stress. And stress in these birds is something very important. And if we do not manage stress in layer birds, they will stop laying. And layers can get stressed with anything, really. They can get stressed from noise, from movement.